Okay, everyone, it looks like it's 9:30, so we'll start. Thank you so much for attending our Grain Handler Drier webinar. We really appreciate your time. My name is Jen Quigley, and I'll be your host for this morning. I will introduce you in a moment to Ben Harkey, who is a wealth of knowledge and really has a passion for helping customers solve their grain dryer challenges and their challenges with grain generally. But before I do that, I just want to cover a few housekeeping notes. So one, I put a note in the chat, but I just wanted to let you know that we are recording this session. We'll make a link available for all of you, and I'll also put this webinar up on our website. So just know that we're recording the session. Ben's going to go through his slides, and then he'll answer questions at the end. So if you've got a question that's occurring to you, please jot it down in the box that you see on the right-hand side, the Q&A box, and we'll make sure that we answer as many questions as possible at the end of the presentation. Ben is in Red Deer and from his home office, and I'm in Calgary, and all of you are scattered across the province. So if there's a lag in the internet, please bear with us. We'll move through it as quickly as we can, but hopefully everyone will have a good connection, and that the powers that be and that control webinars will send us good fortune. It's my great pleasure to introduce you to Ben Harkey. We've been working together on this webinar project for the last couple of weeks, and what's really become clear to me is just Ben's passion for customers, how he works day and night and blood, sweat, and tears to make sure that they get the solutions that are going to help them produce the best grain possible and get the best price at the market. And really all of our team feels the same sort of passion. So it's been an honor to get to know him a little bit better and to work with him on this project. Ben's worked with UFA for 34 years, and right out of college he was involved in a grain drying research project. And from there he spent the next 10 years servicing grain dryers, primarily mixed flow grain dryers and related equipment. And he shared with me that he's made it one of his missions in life to help farmers understand how to properly size and operate their aeration systems to ensure they have the best possible product to market. Over those 34 years, Ben has driven over 100,000 kilometers to find customers and help customers right across Western Canada and the Northwest US. And as I say, he's got a ton of experience and a wealth of knowledge. So with that, I'll pass it over to you, Ben.
Thanks, Jen. Good morning, everybody, and thanks for joining us. So we're just going to start off with benefits of a grain handler dryer, or a dryer in general even. So a common rule of thumb is with most farmers that have dryers is they start combining their wheat at 18% and dry it. This could give you a 2-week head start on your harvest. Rather than having to wait for your crop to dry in the field, you can actually start early and get that grain off the field and into the bin dry. This summer or this fall, even some areas in central Alberta here, they cut their wheat and it did not want to dry below 18%. They waited and waited and waited. So the customers that actually had dryers could actually be out combining it and running it through their dryer. The farmers without dryers had to actually wait for that crop to dry in the field. So really, having a grain handler dryer in your arsenal will give you some control over Mother Nature in your harvest, thereby reducing your stress level. It's kind of like having harvest insurance. Next screen, please. So a couple benefits of having a grain handler dryer. So like I'd mentioned, you can actually start your harvest earlier, but during the harvest season, you can actually be harvesting later in the day, so after the ambient temperature reaches the dew point, and start earlier in the morning, or even run all night if the weather cooperates and rain doesn't stop your equipment. In some cases, a grain dryer can actually even replace a combine. For example, if you have 3 combines right now and your moisture content comes up on your crop, you have to shut down all 3 combines. You have 0 harvest happening. But if you have a grain dryer, you can keep 2 combines running and your grain dryer, and you can continue harvesting. It might be a little bit slower rate, but you're still getting crop into the bin. UFA has actually put together some very attractive financing offers on grain handler dryers right now. Next, please. So this is a chart from Alberta Agriculture just showing you how many pounds of water are in a pound of barley, or in a bushel of barley, sorry. So if you look at 18% barley, it actually has 9 pounds of water in it. Dry barley isn't totally free of water. It actually has 9.1 pounds of water in it. So when you look at drying barley, and the reason I'm using barley is because these are numbers actually released by the Alberta government, you're actually removing 1.5 pounds per bushel of water when you're drying your barley from 18 down to 14.8%. One thing you want to make sure that you do or don't do is over dry your grain. For example, if you took that same barley and dried it down to 12%, which has 5.6 pounds of water in it, you're going to be removing too much water, which will actually reduce your bushel weight by 3%, which will cost you about 16 cents per bushel when barley's selling at $5.50 per bushel. Next screen, please. So we'll look at cost of drying grain. So the numbers, there's a number that's assigned to all different types of dryers. And that number actually is an indication of the efficiency of the grain-air interaction in the dryer. This range is from 1,500 to 3,000 BTUs per pound of water removed. A grain handler dryer typically requires between 1,500 and 1,800 BTUs per pound of water. A typical cross-flow dryer requires 2,000 to 3,000 BTUs per pound of water. So just a quick calculation on the difference. So 18% to 14% in barley, using an average gas price for August in Alberta. It's going to, through a grain handler dryer, it'll cost you about half a cent per bushel. Now this is a relative number. On a cross-flow grain dryer, that number will actually be double. Aeration for drying grain at best with perfect conditions and sufficient air volumes, the moisture content of the grain in the bin with aeration may be reduced by about 1%. Aeration really should only be used to maintain consistent temperatures in your grain mass in the bin. Next slide, please. So, grain handler grain dryers actually have a fairly old origin. They are actually a direct descendant of the original Vertec dryers, which were developed in Vermilion in the early 80s. Grain handler actually acquired the design from Vertec and continued designing to this day on that same design. So if you notice on a grain handler dryer, the air volume required is 40 to 50 CFMs per bushel. On a typical cross-flow dryer, it's 100 CFMs per bushel and more. With the increased airflow on a cross-flow dryer, your BTU requirements are considerably higher. When you're trying to raise your temperature of your air from ambient to 170 degree plenum temperature, and you're only running 40 to 50 CFMs per bushel, it'll take a relatively small amount of heat to actually heat that air. But if you double or in some cases triple that air volume, that doubles and triples the amount of gas or BTUs required to heat that air. Next slide, please. So here's a graphic showing on a mixed flow dryer how the grain and air interacts. So the red ducts are actually the heating ducts, which are connected to the heating plenum inside. The blue triangles are actually the exhaust ducts, which are only open to the outside. So the grain actually flows down from the top of the dryer around all these ducts. The air is forced through the grain from the heating ducts to the exhaust ducts. With the grain continually moving around both ducts, that results in even heating and moisture removal from the grain. Next slide. So here's how a typical cross-flow grain dryer works. The air is actually pumped in, the hot air is pumped in to the center plenum, through a screen, through the grain column, and through another screen. This is one of the reasons they need significantly higher airflows, because they need to actually force that air through the screen, through the grain column, and through a second screen. What the result of this is the grain closest to the burner, closest to the plenum, actually gets extremely hot. It gets very close to plenum temperature. But the grain that's towards the outside screen doesn't get nearly as hot. It gives you really uneven drying of the grain, heating and drying of the grain. And in some cases, it will actually damage your grain because you'll be heating the grain closest to the plenum too fast and too much. Another thing with cross-flow grain dryers is you need to clean those screens regularly, especially if you're drying canola. The oil from canola and the small chaff from canola will actually plug those screens. If those screens get plugged off, you're not going to get sufficient airflow through the grain column, and that will cause hot spots and potentially fires. One of the big concerns with a cross-flow dryer is you can actually start with a number one grain in the top of the dryer, although it's high in moisture, but by the time it comes down through the bottom of the dryer, you actually could end up with a feed grade because of the damage occurring and the uneven heating that occurs in the grain column. On the right-hand side of this picture, this is another version of a cross-flow dryer, and it's using recovered cooling air to preheat the air before it goes past the burner and through the fan. Don't try and do this with canola. What ends up happening is you can actually draw canola seeds, small canola seeds, canola chaff into the fan and run it right past the open flame of the burner, and that will cause a fire. At the left-hand side, extreme left-hand side of the screen, you'll see a picture that I found on one of the Facebook groups I'm a member of, and this fellow just finished cleaning his cross-flow grain dryer. He was actually inside with a pressure washer. And that's one of the things that you have to maintain when you have a cross-flow dryer, is it has to be clean, whether you're brushing it out, vacuuming it out, or pressure washing it out. Those screens have to stay clean. Next screen, please. So we're going to talk about retention a little bit. Retention is probably one of the most important factors in a grain dryer. You want to keep that grain in the dryer as long as possible. The grain kernel actually takes time to release the moisture from the middle of the kernel to the surface where we can actually evaporate it off of the seed. If that grain does not have enough time to release that moisture and pull it off in the dryer, it will end up being extreme rebound in your dry bin. So, for example, a tall, shorter dryer actually has more retention time than a shorter, longer dryer, even though the bushel per hour capacity is the same. For example, an 816 dryer, which is 8 feet long, 16 tiers tall, drying wheat, heat and cool, with a moisture content, or you want to do a 5% reduction in moisture, has about a 700 bushel per hour capacity. A 1607 has exactly the same capacity. It's 16 feet long and only 7 tiers high. The 816 has more retention because of the increased height. And that will get you the best possible drying conditions that you can get. So in a nutshell, an increased retention time results in a reduced amount of rebound in your dry bin. And what rebound is after you finish drying your grain, you put it into your dry grain bin, and if it's going in there supposedly dry, you go back a couple days later, you pull a sample out of it, and now it's 1.5 or 2% above dry. That's called rebound. So that's the migration of the moisture from the center of the kernel to the outside of the kernel. Next slide, please. So some of the features on a grain handler dryer specifically, the grain handler believes in safety. So grain handler is really the only manufacturer that provides both a high and low gas pressure safeties. Having both of those safeties built into the system makes the gas train extremely safe. Like we have high temperature shutdown, high plenum temperature shutdown, empty wet bin shutdown, full dry bin shutdown, and metering problem shutdown. Moisture temperatures and control, you can control your feed rates from your smartphone. The moisture control that we use is a Drier Master moisture control, which are field proven in both drying and bulk handling applications. A lot of the other dryer companies out there actually tried manufacturing their own with very limited success. Another feature of the grain handler dryer is it uses the same gauge material for all of the tiers in their dryer. So it's a very heavy duty dryer, and it can support itself at full height, unlike other dryers that are actually lighter gauges as they move up. Some of those other dryers actually require guying to the ground at certain heights on the dryer because they won't self-support. The even gauges going all the way from bottom to top makes it really easy to expand the dryer in the future. And what I mean by that is if you want to take an 810 or 1610 dryer and add another 5 tiers to it, you just take the garner, which is the top of the dryer, take it off, drop the extra tiers on top, put the garner back on, change the motor sizes, and you're off and running again. With any particular series of dryers, you can actually do that without changing the fans and without changing the burner. Next slide, please. Yes.
Before we go to the next slide, just tell me about the warranty a little bit.
Oh, grain handler has the longest parts warranty in the industry. As a matter of fact, I've actually searched around and cannot find dryer manufacturers' warranties listed on their websites or on their brochures. Grain handler has 5-year parts and warranty, and there's nothing else I can find that's comparable in the industry.
Awesome, thank you.
When I talk about expansions on the dryers, so if we, for example, the dryers that we have in stock are an 810 and 1610 dryers, and one of the reasons we picked those dryers is because it covers a very large demographic of grain producers in Alberta. So an 810 grain dryer, if you buy an 810 dryer today and you need to expand it, you can easily expand it to an 812 or an 816 dryer without changing the fans or burners, just by changing the horsepower of the motors. Same thing happens with the 1610. If you have a 1610 today, you can increase the height of that dryer all the way to a 1626 without changing the burner or the fans, just by changing the horsepowers of the motors. Next slide, please. This is a couple of basic layouts that I've designed for a couple of clients. These are by no means all the different configurations that are possible, but it shows one configuration of just augers and one configuration using just bucket elevators. Now it can be a combination of both of those. Other equipment could be included. This is just a couple of examples to spur some thought. One thing I'll touch on this slide is wet bins. Your wet surge bins are your most important part of your grain dryer system. You want to make sure that you always have a minimum of 2 wet grain bins. The reason for that is, for example, if you have a single 10,000 bushel wet bin, your dryer has a 500 bushel per hour capacity, it takes 20 hours to empty that bin from full before you can change what kind of crop you're actually harvesting. Whereas if you had 2 5,000 bushel bins at 500 bushels per hour, it only takes 10 hours to empty one of those bins from 100% full. This means that worst case, you've only got an overnight period before you can actually start your next crop, because one bin will be empty for the next morning. Next slide, please. So here's a list of our contacts. all of our UFA contacts across the province. You can feel free to call any of us or email any of us with any questions, concerns, requests for quotes, information. And on that, I can answer questions now.
Perfect. So we encourage everyone that if you can see that Q&A box on the right hand of your screen, please put your questions in there, and I'll continue to ask them as I get the questions so that you can hear the little dings. Those are the questions coming in. So the first question, Ben, for you is, just in a nutshell, can you summarize the differences between mixed flow and cross flow dryers specific to the grain handler?
Specifically, in a nutshell, is efficiency. Efficiency and grain quality. We all are in the business to sell the best possible product we can. So if you're damaging your grain in your cross flow grain dryer, obviously you're not going to have the best possible quality of product to sell. The efficiency and the mixing qualities of the grain handler dryer will give you the best possible quality of product at the end of the day.
Perfect. We've got a question here about power. What power is required for a grain handler dryer?
So on the 800 series dryers, we can run those on single phase or 3-phase. On the 16-foot dryers, we can primarily run those on 3-phase only.
Okay.
I am, however, working on a method of actually potentially running some of the 16-footers on single phase.
Okay. Can you tell us about the lead times? There's a question, what are the lead times to get a grain dryer?
Well, right now we have 2 810s in stock and a 1610 in stock. They're sitting in Camrose right now. Typically, right at this time of year, if we were to order a dryer, we'd be about a 12-week lead time. Obviously, once we get closer to spring and summer, the lead times will actually increase.
Okay. Another question has come in. What is required when cleaning a grain handler dryer?
To clean a grain handler dryer, once you've finished drying your product and emptied the dryer, to clean the dryer, all you do is open the doors under the drag conveyors. There's 4 handles you open, and all the remaining product that won't come out of the dryer will actually drop straight out of the dryer. Close the doors up, and you're ready for the next product.
Perfect. Another question has come in. What are the possibilities of setting fire to a mixed flow dryer?
Mixed flow dryer, specifically the grain handler dryer, actually some of the safeties that are built into it will prevent a fire from occurring. But a couple other things are the burner is actually positioned above the fan, the main heating fan or fans. So the flame itself is never in contact with any product. That will cause a huge reduction in fire risk. If the fan is actually horizontal in front of the fans, the open flame is exposed to the chaff and materials inside the dryer.
Okay. Another point, someone's just asked about how to, someone has asked in the chat about how to get a Q&A. So for those of you that are looking at your screen, there's 3 dots on the far right at the bottom that you just need to click to open up the Q&A screen. From there, you should be able to type in your question and then hit send. Okay, and I just want to point out as well that this deck and all of this information is available on our website at ufa.com/grain dryers. So if you're looking for a copy of this information or a copy of the contact information for the grain handler dryer reps, the names that you see on the screen now, all of that information is on our website. Okay, back to questions. Is a concrete pad required for a grain dryer?
Most grain dryers should be mounted on a concrete pad. for any kind of a grain dryer, it's important for that dryer to remain level both directions for it to actually work properly. So a pad is required, but in winter you can temporarily set something up to get you through the winter, provided the ground is actually frozen, and early in the spring you can actually pour your pad and permanently put your dryer on that pad.
Perfect. Another question has come in about the smartphone element. So I know we mentioned that, but the question is, are alerts to the phone possible when it shuts down, and does someone need to be watching full time?
So that's two parts to that question. So the first part to that question is yes, you can get alerts to your phones, especially when you have the Drier Master Control System. That one is fully cell phone compliant and capable. Even without the smartphone capability, you don't have to have somebody watching the dryer full time because of the excess amount of safeties that are built into the grain handler dryer.
Perfect.
There are other methods to actually notify people if the dryer has shut down without actually doing it wirelessly.
Okay. Another question has come in regarding the moisture controller. I know that you spoke to that and it's mentioned on the slide, but can you give a little bit more depth on that Drier Master moisture control?
So I've been working with Drier Master for almost 30 years now. Drier Master actually is used in a number of different industries to check moisture of grain, all the way from grain dryers and tempering systems in feedlots, all the way to the bulk loading or ship loading facilities on the coast. So up to 50,000 bushels per hour, they'll be pulling moisture samples continually, and their moisture contents that they're actually getting back are within a 0.1% of what the grain moisture actually is, and that's on 50,000 bushels per hour. That gives me a lot of comfort in using the Drier Master Control. I do know a couple other systems that don't work quite so well.
Very good. Another question from a farmer. This person says they farm 3,000 acres. What do you recommend for a dryer size?
So the first thing I would look at is acres, and the second thing I would look at is how you split your acres up. So if the majority of your acres is canola, I would be leaning towards a larger dryer. If the majority of your grain is cereals or pulses, I would look at smaller dryers. And the reason for that is because canola actually takes longer to dry. Because of the increased static pressure and its resistance to releasing that moisture, it actually takes a little bit longer for that grain to dry. Cereal grains and pulses dry very, very quickly, low static pressures, so you can see higher capacities out of smaller dryers.
Okay. Another question has come in. Can you compare the grain dryer handler to the Nico dryer?
Yes, I can. There's a couple of very distinct differences between the two of them. One big difference is the gas train, where grain handler actually has a high pressure, low pressure safeties, an industrial modulating valve. We have a very robust, safe gas train. In comparison to the Nico gas train, they don't have a high pressure or a low pressure shutdown. It's a less durable or less robust modulating valve. The safety differences are huge. The other big difference is grain handler, like I was saying, from bottom to top on the tiers are all the same gauge. Whereas on a Nico dryer, the gauges are heavy at the bottom and very light at the top. What ends up happening there is if you want to expand that dryer, you actually have to put tiers in the middle of the dryer in almost a staggered arrangement. And once you get to a certain height, you actually have to guide that dryer to the ground. It's not self-supporting or strong enough to actually support itself in wind. Those are a couple of the big differences.
Okay. Thank you so much. There's been a few questions that just came in, so just bear with me while I sort through them. The next question is, where do we get parts from when something is happening, and so if someone needs a replacement part, where would those parts come from and who should they contact? And the second question from the same person is, where are these dryers built?
So I'll cover the second one first. The dryers themselves are actually built in Minnesota and brought into stock into Camrose. The parts, we actually stock all of the parts in Red Deer. So if you need a replacement part, you can contact me or any one of the sales reps for parts, and we have them in stock in Red Deer.
Perfect. You mentioned at the beginning that UFA had financing for these dryers. Can you give any other details on those financing offers?
I'm not really up on the financing a whole lot, but I know one program that is available right now is no payments for 6 months on a dryer purchase. So that would mean you could get your dryer delivered today and not make a first payment until June.
Perfect. There's a question about someone has seen a unit on display at the Camrose store. Can you tell us about that unit? Which of those units is it?
So the unit,
the
unit that Camrose store is actually an 810. That one is set up as propane. It's the standard 810 build. So that dryer could be easily expanded to an 812 or an 816.
Perfect. There's just a note here. I just want to make sense of it. In the 820 single phase, how many amps is there?
Okay, so we can do an 820 in single phase. I'd have to calculate what the full load amps are, or full load requirements are for an 820. But that's something I can easily do.
Do you want some time to do that, or shall we because I can also, after this session, I can give you this person's name and you could get back to them directly.
I can do that fairly quickly here. We can go on to the next question. I'll just open up that calculator.
Okay, you bet. So just looking through the questions. Okay. One quick question is, and I don't know if this is true, but wow, we're getting lots of questions. So I'm just trying to make sure that we don't miss anything. Do you have comparisons of natural gas costs compared to propane costs as an average, realizing that both fluctuate?
I don't have actual numbers as a comparison, but I do have experience with both. I've had certain customers that have actually said propane is about 50 to 75% more expensive than natural gas. The other benefit to natural gas is you can continue drying at minus 20, minus 25 with natural gas, whereas with propane, you start getting that propane liquefying and you can't vaporize it. So there are more benefits to natural gas other than just price.
Okay, perfect. The next question is, what is the largest size of dryer on a single phase at a farm?
That we can do on a farm would be an 820.
Okay.
Now, like I was saying before, I am working on a potential method of actually running a 16 series dryer on single phase as well, but I'm not 100% complete that yet.
Perfect. And just let me know when you want to go back to that other question when you have an opportunity to do that comparison.
Yep. I'm just working those numbers right now.
Okay. Okay. So there is a question here about what type of fan is on an 810 and what type of fan is on an 816?
The 810 and 816 have exactly the same fan. The fans don't change. Both the heating fan and the cooling fan are exactly the same fan. For the 810, all the dryers and the 8 series from 810 all the way to 820 are the same fans, but on the 820 there's actually an additional fan. So all the way to the 816 are exactly the same fans for the entire series.
Perfect. Okay. I think I have answered all of the questions. Is there anything else that anyone else wanted to ask? Now is your opportunity. I also wanted to let you know that if you go onto your website, I mentioned this before, we'll have all of this information there. We're recording this presentation, so give us a day or two and it will be up there. But all of this content and information and specs is available on our website, and you can also find all of the UFA contact email addresses as well as phone numbers on that website. So just reach out to the rep that is in the town or city closest to you across the province, and they'd be more than happy to speak with you about your individual farm needs and your individual concerns. Okay, a couple more questions have come in. What's the low speed on a centrifugal fan?
The low speed.
Or we might need some, go ahead. But if you're talking, I can't hear you.
Oh, yeah, I don't understand what the question is.
Okay.
Low-speed centrifugal fan. No, it is not a low-speed centrifugal fan. It's actually a high-speed forward-biased fan. And what that means is the blades are actually turned forward rather than backwards like on a low-speed fan. What that does is that gives you more static pressure capabilities and a more consistent air volume at higher static pressures. So as the static pressure increases, the actual volume of air coming off the fan does not decrease.
Perfect. And then the next one is, I don't think we've answered this one yet, but can the 808 be expanded and what is involved?
Actually, an 808 can be expanded as well. So I keep talking about the 810 simply because that's the one we have in stock. But the 808 is exactly the same scenario where you can add tiers onto it. The fans stay the same. You will have to change the horsepowers of the motors, and the burner will stay the same. So as I was explaining before, you take the garner off the top, you add tiers onto the top, and you change the motors.
Perfect. Just a note about that visual that had all of the different kinds of grain handler dryers. Just to clarify for everyone, what you see in the red boxes, the 810 and 1610, as Ben mentioned, we have those in stock. So if you're interested in those are things that we can turn around for you quite quickly. However, if you're interested in one of the other models, we can certainly order that in for you. That's not a problem. So any of the models that you see on this page are available. It's just that the 810 and 1610 can get into your hands a little bit more quickly. Okay, I'm just checking the question box. There's a cost here, or a question here about an option for quiet fans. Can you speak to the fans and whether or not they're quiet in comparison to other models or other dryers?
So that's an interesting question. So I'm going to take a shot in the dark and say whoever asked that question has a grain dryer and they don't have a grain handler dryer. Grain handler dryer with the forward biased centrifugal high-speed fans, the fans are actually running at about 1,000 RPM. You can actually stand beside those fans when they're running and have a conversation. So there's no necessity for any special equipment to make the fans quieter.
Okay, perfect. And then there's a note here about cost. What's the average cost for an 810?
And so average cost there really isn't an average because every site is a little bit different. Power changes, the cost, whether you're propane, natural gas, whether you want a leveling auger or gravity fill, cross drag conveyor. So there really isn't an average cost, but feel free to contact one of the guys and they can figure out a quote exactly for what you're looking for.
Perfect. So unless there's any other questions, we'll just give it a few minutes. I'll just let you know that we'll be sending out, as I said, an email that will have a link in it to this webinar so that you can review it. And if you want to look back over any of the slides, you'll have the opportunity to do that. Also in that email, we will be sending you a link to a customer video that we have got on our website if you're interested, but I'll send you the link in the email. And basically, a couple of our customers were very gracious and kind enough for us to go out to their farm and see how their grain dryer was working and just tell us a few things about the grain handler and how it's affected their operation. So I'll send you a link to that video if you're interested, and you can hear it from them directly. And I think that's it. No other questions have come in, so I just wanted to take the time to say thank you. Thanks for all your questions and for your participation. We really appreciate this opportunity, and we will wish you all a very good day. Ben, do you want to say anything else?
Yep, I want to thank everybody and whoever had the question about the current on the 820 single phase. Actually, if you can give me a call or send me a message, I'll finish the calculations and I'll let you know what that current value is.
Okay, perfect. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day, and thanks so much for your time. Take care.